You reached for the ibuprofen this morning. Your knee's been barking at you for years, so you didn't even think about it. You just shook 2 out of the bottle, same as you do most mornings, same as you did yesterday. Maybe you washed it down with your coffee, grabbed your keys, and got on with your day. Nothing about that moment felt like a decision. It felt like brushing your teeth. Here's what nobody in that moment is thinking about. Your kidneys, right now, are filtering about a cup of blood every 2 minutes. They've been doing it since before you woke up, and they'll keep doing it while you read this sentence, while you drive to the store, while you sleep tonight. You cannot feel them working. You cannot feel the roughly 2 quarts of waste and extra fluid they're pulling out of your bloodstream today alone. And that's exactly the problem, because you also can't feel them being damaged. Chronic kidney disease is one of the only serious diseases in the body that gives you almost no symptoms until it's already advanced. No pain, no obvious signs, just quiet, steady loss of function, year after year, while everything on the outside looks completely normal. I'm going to tell you about the everyday habit that's damaging kidneys more than almost anything else people don't think twice about. And I'll be honest with you, it's not sugar and it's not salt. Then I'm going to walk you through 5 things backed by real research that actually support the way your kidneys work. And near the end, I'm going to correct one of the most common claims you'll hear in kidney videos just like this one. A claim that sounds hopeful, but isn't quite true. And I think you deserve to know the difference. Stay with me to the end, because the correction matters more than the list. Last month, I got a message from Diane, 67, from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She wrote, "Dr. Clark, my doctor mentioned my eGFR was 58 at my last physical, and I just nodded along like I knew what that meant. I didn't want to seem dumb, so I didn't ask. Am I in trouble? Diane, I want you to know 2 things. First, you are absolutely not alone. Most people nod along at that exact moment. Second, no, an eGFR of 58 does not mean you're in trouble, but it does mean your kidneys are asking for your attention, and today's video is going to tell you exactly what that number means and what to do about it. If you've ever had a lab number handed to you with 0 explanation, drop a comment with what number you're still confused about, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. Here's my angle on kidney health, and it's a simple one. Your annual physical checks your kidneys for about 10 minutes a year. Your daily habits, what you eat, what you reach for when something hurts, how much water you actually drink, those check in with your kidneys about 60 times an hour every single day. That gap between the 10 minutes and the 60 times an hour is where kidney disease quietly gets worse, and it's also where it can quietly get better. That gap is what I focus on. If you've been getting value from these videos, from the kidney series, from the fermented foods content, from what we've covered on gut health, we do have a channel membership that helps keep this going. It doesn't change what you get here. Everything stays free every week, no matter what. But if you want early access to new videos before they go public, a badge next to your name in the comments, and a more direct line to reach me, that's what the membership is there for. The link is below this video. No pressure, and let's get back to it. Now, let's get into the actual science. To understand why any food or habit helps your kidneys, you need to understand one thing first, and it's the single fact I want you to walk away remembering. High blood sugar and high blood pressure damage your kidneys through 4 separate doors. And almost everything we talk about today is really about closing one or more of those doors. Each of your kidneys has, on average, around 1 million tiny filtering units called nephrons. They're microscopic. They don't regenerate once they're damaged. Unlike your liver, your kidneys don't grow new filtering units to replace lost ones. So every door that stays open year after year is doors that don't reopen once they've been shut for good. That's not meant to scare you, it's meant to explain why prevention does so much more work here than almost anywhere else in the body. Door 1 is called AGE formation, Advanced Glycation End Products. When blood sugar runs high for years, sugar molecules start sticking to proteins in your blood vessels, including the tiny vessels inside your kidneys' filtering units. Those sugar-coated proteins get stiff and dysfunctional. Think of it like syrup slowly crystallizing on a fine mesh screen. The screen still looks like a screen from a distance, but the openings are gummed up, and less makes it through the way it should. This is also, by the way, why the number your doctor calls A1C, your average blood sugar over roughly 3 months, matters so much for kidney health specifically, not just for diabetes management in general. Every point that number sits above target is more syrup on that screen. Door 2 is oxidative stress. This is just wear and tear at the cellular level. Unstable molecules called free radicals damaging the delicate tissue of the nephron faster than your body can repair it. Your kidneys are more vulnerable to this kind of damage than most organs, because filtering blood all day, every day, means constant exposure to whatever is circulating in that blood, good or bad. It's a bit like a water filter that never gets a day off. The filtration material itself takes on damage simply from doing its job continuously, and antioxidant-rich foods are one of the few tools that genuinely help offset that wear. Door 3 is chronic inflammation, driven by a molecular switch called NFKB. When that switch stays flipped on for years, which happens with unmanaged blood sugar, chronic high blood pressure, and obesity, your kidney tissue stays in a low-grade inflammatory state that gradually scars the filtering units. That scarring is called fibrosis, and it's essentially permanent, the kidney equivalent of a scar replacing healthy, flexible tissue after a wound. Scar tissue holds together, but it doesn't function the way the original tissue did. Door 4 is hemodynamic strain, pressure damage, plain and simple. High blood pressure forces those tiny, delicate filtering vessels to work against pressure they were never built for. Picture a garden hose meant for gentle household water pressure suddenly running at fire hydrant force, day after day, year after year. Something eventually gives. Over years, that pressure damages the blood vessels feeding each nephron, and once enough of those vessels are damaged, the whole filtering unit downstream of them starts to fail. Now, here's the honest part, the part most videos in this space skip. A few years back, researchers found a compound that, in animal studies, appeared to block 3 of these 4 pathways at once. Genuinely exciting, published in one of the top medical journals in the world. Naturally, the next step was testing it in real human kidney patients with a rigorous double-blind trial. And in that human trial, it didn't outperform a placebo on the actual kidney damage markers doctors care about. I'm not telling you that story to be discouraging. I'm telling you because that's what good science looks like. A promising idea, tested rigorously and adjusted based on what the data actually shows, not what we hoped it would show. Keep that story in mind, because I'm about to walk you through a very similar situation with an ingredient you've probably already got in your spice cabinet. If you've watched more than 1 or 2 kidney health videos on this platform, you've almost certainly heard some version of this claim. A specific food or spice can reverse kidney damage. Turmeric, specifically its active compound curcumin, gets this claim attached to it constantly. And I understand why. Curcumin genuinely does have real anti-inflammatory properties. It genuinely does inhibit that NFKB pathway we just talked about, at least in a test tube and in animal models. So the mechanism sounds airtight. Here's the myth bust. No single food reverses chronic kidney disease. Not turmeric, not any of the 5 things I'm about to show you, not anything sold in a bottle. And I can prove that claim wrong with the best kind of evidence there is, a large, rigorous human trial designed specifically to test it. In 2023, a research team ran what's called the MPACCKD trial, published in the journal Nephrology, Dialysis, Transplantation. This wasn't a small pilot study. It was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial with 533 participants, all of whom had albuminuric chronic kidney disease, meaning protein was already showing up in their urine, a real marker of kidney damage. Half received 90 milligrams a day of a specially formulated, highly bioavailable microparticle curcumin. Half received a placebo. 6 months later, researchers measured the 2 things that actually matter: how much protein was leaking into the urine and how well the kidneys were filtering. The result? No significant difference between the curcumin group and the placebo group on either measure. 90 milligrams of a next-generation, highly absorbable curcumin taken daily for half a year did not slow kidney kidney disease progression. So what do you actually do with that information? You don't throw turmeric in the trash. Smaller trials, the kind that get quoted constantly in this niche without ever mentioning the bigger trial that came after them, have shown curcumin can meaningfully lower inflammatory markers in the blood, and a handful of them found a modest reduction in protein in the urine. That's real, directional evidence for an anti-inflammatory effect. What it isn't is proof that curcumin slows or reverses the actual disease process, which is the much higher bar the MPACC-KD trial was specifically designed to test in a population large enough and long enough to actually answer the question properly. That's the difference between this affects a blood marker and this changes the disease. And it's a difference worth understanding because it applies to a lot more than turmeric. Here's the resolve. Use turmeric paired with black pepper, since the piperine in black pepper dramatically improves how much curcumin your body actually absorbs. Some research suggests as much as a 20-fold increase in absorption. Use it as one small, honest piece of a much bigger picture, alongside genuinely tight blood sugar control, blood pressure management, and the 5 items I'm about to walk you through. Just don't let anyone, including me, tell you it's a reversal switch. It isn't. Nothing is. And I'd rather tell you that plainly than sell you a spice rack as medicine. Drop an A in the comments if you'd already heard the reverses kidney damage claim somewhere else. Or a B if this is the first time you're hearing the real research behind it. I want to tell you about Walter, 69, from Tulsa, Oklahoma, because his story shows exactly why this distinction matters. Walter had stage 3 kidney disease, diagnosed almost by accident during a hospital stay for something unrelated. It rattled him. He went home and did what a lot of us do when we're scared. He spent a weekend watching video after video, and after watching one too many promising a natural cure, he started taking a high-dose turmeric supplement, convinced it would bring his numbers back to normal on its own. What he didn't do in the months that followed was stay consistent with his blood pressure medication, because in his mind, the turmeric was handling it. And he figured the medication could take a back seat. 6 months later, at his follow-up labs, his eGFR hadn't improved. It had actually ticked down slightly. His doctor didn't panic, and neither did Walter once he understood what was actually going on. She sat down with him and explained essentially the same thing I just told you. Walked him through the actual research behind the supplement he'd been taking, and put together a plan that put his blood pressure management back at the center, with turmeric staying in the picture as a supporting player rather than the main event. She kept his existing medication dose steady rather than increasing it, since the underlying trend was still manageable once he was actually consistent with it. A year after that, his numbers had stabilized. Not reversed, stabilized. I stopped looking for a magic pill, Walter told me, and started actually managing the whole picture instead. That's not a dramatic ending, it's an honest one. And honest is what actually helps people. Let's start with something already in most of your kitchens. Garlic contains a compound called allicin, which only forms once you crush, chop, or chew the clove. It doesn't exist in the intact garlic sitting on your counter. Once allicin forms, your body converts part of it into hydrogen sulfide, a molecule that relaxes the smooth muscle lining your blood vessels, allowing them to widen. That's a direct hit on door 4 from our mechanism section, hemodynamic strain. Wider blood vessels mean less pressure, and less pressure means less strain on the delicate vessels feeding each nephron. Here's the practical insight almost nobody mentions. The enzyme that creates allicin, called alliinase, needs a few minutes of air exposure to fully activate once the cell walls of the clove are broken. If you crush your garlic and throw it straight into a hot pan, you're cooking off a good portion of that benefit before it even forms, because heat deactivates the enzyme before it's finished its job. Crush or finely chop your garlic and let it sit on the cutting board for about 10 minutes before you cook it. That single habit meaningfully changes how much active allicin makes it into your food, and it costs you nothing except a little patience while you prep the rest of the meal. Garlic is also, quietly, one of the few kidney-friendly foods that's essentially free of both potassium and phosphorus, which means it fits comfortably into a kidney diet at almost any stage without the usual math. And if you're on blood pressure medication already, that's genuinely good. Garlic's blood pressure lowering effect is generally modest and additive, but mention it to your doctor if you're using concentrated garlic supplements rather than food form garlic, since supplement doses can interact with blood thinners like warfarin. This next one is probably the most under-discussed ingredient in the entire kidney health space, and it deserves far more attention than it gets. Arugula, along with other leafy greens, is naturally rich in dietary nitrates. Once you eat them, your body converts those nitrates into nitrite and eventually into nitric oxide, one of the most well-studied vasodilators in all of human physiology. Nitric oxide widens blood vessels throughout your body, including the ones supplying your kidneys, which means better blood flow directly to the filtering units doing all the work. This isn't theoretical. In a real pilot study of chronic kidney disease patients, researchers gave participants a concentrated dietary nitrate dose from beetroot juice and measured something called the renal resistive index, essentially a measurement of how much resistance blood flow is meeting inside the kidney. The nitrate dose significantly lowered both blood pressure and that resistance measurement within 4 hours. It was a small study, 17 patients, so I want to be honest about that limitation, but the mechanism is rock solid, and it lines up with larger population studies showing higher dietary nitrate intake is associated with better kidney outcomes over time. Practical insight. Nitrates are heat and water sensitive, so heavy boiling leaches a meaningful portion of them out into the cooking water and down the drain. Eat your arugula and other leafy greens raw in a salad, or lightly sautéed rather than boiled, to hold on to more of that nitrate content. And pairing them with a small amount of vitamin C, a squeeze of lemon, a few red bell pepper strips, actually helps your saliva convert more of that nitrate into the active nitrite form during that first stage of digestion before it ever reaches your bloodstream. It's a small pairing that makes the whole mechanism work slightly better. One caution worth knowing, and I'd rather mention it here than bury it at the end. Leafy greens do contain vitamin K, which plays a role in blood clotting. If you're on the blood thinner warfarin specifically, consistency matters more than avoidance. So the medication is dosed around your typical intake. So talk to your doctor about keeping your leafy green intake steady from week to week, rather than cutting it out entirely or suddenly loading up on it, since sudden swings in either direction can throw off how well the medication is working. I'm grouping these two together because they solve the same problem from two different angles. Oxidative stress, door 2 from our mechanism section. Berries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries in particular, are loaded with anthocyanins, the pigments responsible for their deep color, which function as potent antioxidants. Red bell peppers bring a similar antioxidant punch through vitamin C and lycopene, plus something genuinely useful for anyone managing kidney disease. According to USDA food composition data, 100 grams of red bell pepper contains roughly 11 milligrams of phosphorus, 107 milligrams of potassium, and just 1 milligram of sodium, genuinely one of the lowest mineral burden vegetables available, which matters enormously if you're already managing potassium or phosphorus restrictions. The practical insight here: frozen berries retain their antioxidant content just as well as fresh. Freezing doesn't meaningfully damage anthocyanins the way some people assume, and they're often more affordable and available year-round. So don't feel like fresh is required, and don't feel guilty reaching for the freezer bag. A half cup of berries a day is a reasonable, sustainable target. Enough to matter, not so much that. You're overloading on natural sugars if you're also managing blood sugar. With red bell pepper, one added benefit worth naming. It's one of the few genuinely versatile raw vegetables, since it holds up well sliced into strips for snacking, doesn't need cooking to be palatable, and pairs naturally with the arugula and lemon combination from the last item, so these two foods can share the same plate without any extra effort on your part. One comment-worthy question for you. Which do you already have in your fridge more often, berries or bell peppers? Let me know below, because I'm curious which one needs more of a nudge from me. This item targets door 3, chronic inflammation, more directly than almost anything else on this list. Wild-caught salmon is rich in the omega-3 fatty acids EPA and DHA, and a 2020 meta-analysis pooling 18 separate clinical trials found that omega-3 supplementation meaningfully reduced proteinuria, protein leaking into the urine, a direct marker of improving kidney filtration function. I specify wild-caught deliberately, and here's the practical insight behind that. Farm-raised salmon is typically fed a diet that includes astaxanthin, a pigment that gives the flesh its pink-orange color. Since farmed salmon doesn't naturally develop that coloring the way wild salmon does from its diet of krill and small crustaceans. To be precise about it, that's not the same thing as the red dye some sources online confuse it with. Astaxanthin isn't a banned food dye, it's a naturally occurring or synthetic pigment, and it's not considered dangerous. But wild-caught salmon generally carries a better, more naturally balanced ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids, along with more confirmed EPA and DHA content per serving. And it sidesteps some of the added ingredient questions that come with farmed fish altogether. Aim for 2 servings a week if your diet and your budget allow it. Canned wild salmon is a perfectly legitimate, more affordable way to get there if fresh fillets aren't practical. And when you cook it, bake or poach rather than fry at high heat. Those delicate omega-3 fats oxidize easily under high direct heat, which works against the exact benefit you're trying to get from the fish in the first place. A simple bake at moderate temperature or a gentle poach in broth or water protects those fats far better than a hot skillet does. This last item connects to something I've talked about before on this channel if you've been with me through the gut health videos, and it might be the single most underused tool in kidney protection. There's a well-documented relationship called the gut-kidney axis. Here's the short version. When your gut microbiome is out of balance, certain gut bacteria produce a toxic byproduct called indoxyl sulfate. Under normal circumstances, healthy kidneys filter this out efficiently. But as kidney function declines, indoxyl sulfate builds up in the bloodstream, and it actually accelerates further kidney damage. It's directly toxic to kidney tissue. It's a vicious cycle. Worse kidneys, worse toxin clearance, worse gut bacteria balance, more toxin production. Fermented foods, plain yogurt with live cultures, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, introduce beneficial bacterial strains that shift your gut microbiome toward producing less of that toxin in the first place, rather than trying to remove indoxyl sulfate after it's already formed. A 2021 meta-analysis pooling multiple randomized trials in chronic kidney disease patients found that probiotic supplementation measurably reduced indoxyl sulfate levels along with inflammatory markers, which is exactly the kind of upstream intervention that tends to matter most over the long run. Practical insight. If fermented foods are new to you, start small, a few tablespoons a day, not a full cup, because a sudden large increase in fermented food intake commonly causes temporary gas and bloating as your gut bacteria adjust to the new bacterial strains showing up. Build up gradually over a couple of weeks rather than diving in all at once. And read labels carefully on store-bought yogurt. Plain, unsweetened varieties with visible live and active cultures on the label are what you're after, since many flavored yogurts add enough sugar to undercut the benefit you're going for. A few questions I know some of you are already forming, so let me get ahead of them. What if my doctor already has me on a blood pressure medication or a diuretic? Does any of this replace that? No. None of what I've covered today replaces a prescribed medication. Everything here works alongside your treatment plan, not instead of it. Does any of this matter if I don't have kidney disease yet? Genuinely, yes. Maybe even more than it matters afterward. Every door I described in the mechanism section starts opening years before a lab test shows a problem. Prevention is where food does its most powerful work. Do I need to cut out protein entirely? No, and please don't. We're going to talk about exactly why in a moment, because over-restricting protein can genuinely backfire. I'm already on dialysis. Does any of this still apply to me? Some of it, with real modifications. Fluid, potassium, and phosphorus restrictions are typically much stricter once you're on dialysis. So please run any of today's specific recommendations past your renal dietitian before changing anything, since your numbers are being managed far more tightly than someone in earlier stages. Can I just take a supplement version of these instead of eating the actual food? Generally, food form is the safer starting point, and here's why. Whole foods come with their natural potassium and phosphorus content already accounted for in the serving sizes I've mentioned, while concentrated supplements, garlic capsules, fish oil at high doses, curcumin extracts, can deliver much larger, less predictable amounts of the active compound, sometimes enough to matter for medication interactions in a way a normal serving of food wouldn't. If you want to explore supplement forms of any of this, that's a conversation to have with your doctor first, not a decision to make from a supplement aisle. Here's something almost no kidney video tells you clearly enough, and it's genuinely important. The right food advice depends on where your kidneys are right now, measured by a number called eGFR, estimated glomerular filtration rate. It's on most standard blood panels, and if you've never asked about yours, that's action step number 1, coming up shortly. Let me give you the actual ranges, because vague reassurance isn't as useful as real numbers. Above 60 is generally considered within a normal to mildly reduced range, and most people at this level don't need significant dietary restriction beyond general healthy eating. Between 45 and 60 is an early watch zone. Potassium usually doesn't need restricting yet, but this is exactly the range where the foods in this video do the most preventive good. Between 30 and 45, potassium attention starts becoming genuinely relevant, and many doctors begin discussing a limit in the neighborhood of 3,000 milligrams a day. Below 30, restriction typically tightens further, often down toward 2,000 milligrams of potassium daily, alongside real, individualized guidance from a renal dietitian, not a YouTube video. And below 15 typically means kidney failure territory, where fluid intake itself, not just individual minerals, becomes tightly managed. If any of those numbers sound like where you might be, that's not a moment for panic, it's a moment to ask your doctor which range you're actually in, and to build your specific plan around that answer. This matters most with a piece of advice you've probably heard conflicting versions of: whole eggs versus egg whites. If you're in that healthy to early range, whole eggs in moderate amounts are perfectly reasonable protein. Restricting protein aggressively at this stage doesn't protect your kidneys, it just deprives your body of something it needs. The same way restricting weight-bearing exercise doesn't protect a healing bone, it just weakens it further. If you're further along, in that moderate to advanced range, the calculation shifts. Whole eggs, in limited quantity, often provide better utilized protein per unit of phosphorus than egg whites alone, because egg white-only diets can actually generate more nitrogen waste per gram of usable protein, the opposite of what you'd want. Once you reach dialysis, the picture flips again, since phosphorus restriction becomes tighter and protein needs actually increase to offset losses from the dialysis process itself, which is when egg whites specifically tend to make more sense. The takeaway: this is not one-size-fits-all advice, and if you have a diagnosis, the conversation to have is with your nephrologist or renal dietitian, not with me. I want to introduce you to Carol, 64, from Boise, Idaho, because her story ties together almost everything we've covered so far. Carol had been managing knee arthritis for years, ever since a hip replacement threw off her gait and put extra strain on that knee. Like a lot of people in her position, she reached for ibuprofen most days without thinking much about it, sometimes twice a day during flare-ups, always from the same family-size bottle she kept in the kitchen cabinet next to the coffee mugs. It had become so routine it barely registered as a decision anymore, the same way it didn't for the person I described at the very start of this video. At a routine physical, her doctor noticed her creatinine had crept up slightly from the year before. Not dramatically, just enough to raise a question. Her doctor asked one simple question: how often are you taking ibuprofen? Carol hadn't even thought to mention it because over-the-counter medication doesn't feel like medication the way a prescription does. Here's the mechanism, and it's worth understanding. NSAIDs like ibuprofen work partly by blocking prostaglandins, which are chemicals that, among other things, help maintain healthy blood flow into the kidneys. Block them regularly over months or years, especially past age 65, and you're chronically restricting blood flow to an organ that depends on steady flow to function well. well. That's door 4 again, hemodynamic strain, just from a different direction than high blood pressure. Carol and her doctor worked out a plan together. Acetaminophen for routine pain, ibuprofen reserved for genuine flare-ups only, alongside adding more of the anti-inflammatory foods we've talked about today, the berries, the salmon, the leafy greens, to help manage the underlying arthritis. Inflammation, without leaning on daily NSAIDs. 6 months later, her numbers had improved. Not dramatically, but genuinely, moving back in the right direction. I had no idea the pain reliever in my cabinet was part of the equation, Carol told me. Nobody had ever connected those dots for me before. Quote, that's the whole reason I made this video. I want to protect the information you just learned because it's genuinely useless if one of these 3 mistakes cancels it out. Mistake 1. Treating over-the-counter pain relievers as harmless because they don't require a prescription. We just walked through exactly why this matters with Carol's story. There's something about a medication sitting on a grocery store shelf rather than behind a pharmacy counter that makes it feel automatically safe, and that feeling is genuinely misleading here. If you're managing arthritis, chronic back pain, or any condition where you're reaching for ibuprofen or naproxen regularly, not occasionally, but as a routine habit, that's a conversation worth having with your doctor, especially past age 65 when kidney sensitivity to these medications increases. Acetaminophen isn't automatically the right substitute for everyone either, particularly if you have liver concerns. So this is genuinely a conversation to have with your doctor, not a simple one-for-one swap you make on your own. Mistake 2. Swinging too far in either direction on protein. We touched on this already in the stage-specific section, but it deserves repeating as its own mistake because I see people make it in both directions, often within the same family. Some people hear kidney disease and slash their protein aggressively on their own without medical guidance, which can lead to muscle loss, fatigue, and poor nutrition, especially in older adults who are already at higher risk for both sarcopenia and falls. Others go the opposite direction. High protein diets, sometimes very high, in the name of blood sugar control or weight loss, without accounting for the extra filtration burden that places on kidneys that may already be under strain. I've talked to patients on both ends of this spectrum, convinced they were doing the responsible thing, and genuinely surprised to learn they'd overcorrected. Neither extreme is safe without professional guidance specific to your actual numbers. Mistake 3, and this is the one that matters most. Treating any food, supplement, or habit from this video as a substitute for medical monitoring or prescribed treatment. Nothing I've shared today replaces regular lab work, a nephrologist if you have one, or medication that's already been prescribed to you. I say this knowing that it's the least exciting sentence in the entire video, and I say it anyway because it's the one that actually protects you. Food is a powerful piece of the picture. It is not the whole picture, and anyone who tells you it is isn't being straight with you. Let's bring this together into something simple and repeatable, because a list of 5 separate foods is a lot to hold in your head. Here's how I'd stack it into an actual routine. Cook with garlic regularly, giving it that 10-minute rest after chopping before it hits the pan. This becomes a background habit within a couple of weeks, not something you have to think about daily once it's in your routine. Add a serving of leafy greens, arugula specifically if you can find it, to lunch or dinner most days, ideally raw or lightly cooked, paired with something vitamin C rich like a few strips of red bell pepper. Keep a half cup of berries on hand as a go-to snack a few times a week, whether fresh or frozen, in a container at eye level in the fridge where you'll actually reach for it instead of the chips. Aim for wild-caught salmon twice a week, baked or poached. And if that feels like a lot of planning, canned wild salmon over a salad is a 5-minute version that still counts. And close out most evenings with a small serving of a fermented food. A few tablespoons of plain yogurt or kefir works well before bed, both for the gut-kidney benefit and because it's an easy habit to actually stick with once it's part of your evening routine rather than something you have to remember separately. If that's still a lot to take in, here's the simplest possible version. 1 sentence. Add a handful of berries or bell pepper to 1 meal a day and swap 1 weekly ibuprofen dose for a conversation with your doctor about alternatives. That alone moves you in the right direction. Here's what I want you to actually do this week, not just think about. Number 1, if you don't already know, your eGFR number, request it at your next appointment. Or check your last lab results if you have online portal access. Most portals show it automatically now, usually right alongside your creatinine value, even if nobody's ever pointed it out to you before. Number 2, if you're taking ibuprofen, naproxen, or aspirin regularly for ongoing pain, bring that specific detail to your next doctor's visit. And be specific about frequency, not just sometimes. Don't wait to be asked because most people never are. Number 3, pick one item from today's list you're not currently eating and add it to your grocery list this week. Just one. Small changes compound, and trying to overhaul everything at once is usually why those changes don't stick past the first week. Number 4, if you have diabetes, high blood pressure, or an existing kidney diagnosis, ask your doctor or nephrologist this exact question. Given my current eGFR and albumin numbers, is my protein intake currently appropriate, or should it be adjusted up or down? That question, asked directly and specifically, gets you a far more useful answer than general advice ever could, because it forces a conversation about your actual numbers instead of averages. Number 5, drink a full glass of water first thing in the morning before coffee. It's a small habit, but consistent morning hydration supports steady filtration and helps prevent the concentrated urine that contributes to kidney stone formation over time. And it's a habit that takes about 30 seconds and requires no planning at all. Here's your challenge for the next 7 nights. Track just 2 things each evening in a notes app or on paper, whether you reached for an NSAID that day, and whether you added 1 kidney-supportive food to a meal. Just observing it changes behavior more than you'd expect. Comment below on day 7 and let me know what you noticed. And if you already have habits that help you manage this balance, share them too. Some of the best tips I've ever gotten for this channel came from your comments, not from journals. One more reminder for our Kidney Health Circle members. Thursday's session is going to walk through exactly how to read an eGFR trend over multiple lab visits, which several of you asked about after last month's video. So bring your numbers if you want them looked at together. If you're not a member yet and this kind of ongoing specific support is something you want, the link is right below this video. If this video helped make one confusing lab number feel a little less intimidating, share it with someone who mentioned their kidneys at a recent checkup. It genuinely helps this find the person who needs it more than any subscribe button does. Though I'd appreciate that too. And finally, the disclaimer that actually matters here, not just boilerplate. If you're on blood pressure medication, diabetes medication, blood thinners like warfarin, or potassium-sparing diuretics, please talk to your doctor before making significant changes to your intake of leafy greens, potassium-rich foods, or any supplement form of the ingredients discussed today, since several of them can interact with those specific medication classes. This video is educational, not a personalized treatment plan. And it doesn't replace the relationship you have with your own doctor. Take care of these 2 organs. They've been working for you since before you could talk, and they deserve a little more of your attention than 10 minutes a year.